Serene was a word you could put to Brooklyn, New York, especially in the summer of 1912. Somber as a word was better, but it did not apply to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Prairie was lovely, and Shenandoah has a beautiful sound. But you couldn't fit those words into Brooklyn. Serene was the only word for it, especially on a Saturday afternoon in summer. Late in the afternoon, the sun slanted down into the mossy yard belonging to Francie Nolan's house and warmed the worn wooden fence. Looking at the shafted sun, Francie had that same fine feeling that came when she recalled the poem they recited in school. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded with moss and in garments green, indistinct in the twilight, stand like druids of eld. The one tree in Francie's yard was neither a pine nor a hemlock. It had pointed leaves which grew along green switches which radiated from the bough and made a tree which looked like a lot of opened green umbrellas. Some people called it the tree of heaven. No matter where its seed fell, it made a tree which struggled to reach the sky. It grew in boarded up lots and out of neglected rubbish heaps, and it was the only tree that grew out of cement. It grew lushly, but only in the tenement districts. You took a walk on a Sunday afternoon and came to a nice neighborhood, very refined. You saw a small one of these trees through the iron gate leading to someone's yard, and you knew that soon that section of Brooklyn would get to be a tenement district. The tree knew. It came there first. Afterwards, poor foreigners seeped in, and the quiet old brownstone houses were hacked up into flats, feather beds were pushed out on the windowsills to air, and the tree of heaven flourished. That was the kind of tree it was. It liked poor people. That was the kind of tree in Francie's yard. Its umbrellas curled over, around, and under her third-floor fire escape. An 11-year-old girl sitting on this fire escape could imagine that she was living in a tree. That's what Francie imagined every Saturday afternoon in summer. Oh, what a wonderful day was Saturday in Brooklyn. Oh, how wonderful anywhere. People were paid on Saturday, and it was a holiday without the rigidness of a Sunday. People had money to go out and buy things. They ate well for once, got drunk, had dates, made love, and stayed up until all hours, singing, playing music, fighting, and dancing, because the morrow was their own free day. They could sleep late until late Mass anyhow. On Sunday, most people crowded into the 11 o'clock Mass. Well, some people, a few, went to early 6 o'clock Mass. They were given credit for this, but they deserved none, for they were the ones who had stayed out so late that it was morning when they got home. So they went to this early Mass, got it over with, and went home and slept all day, absolved from sin. For Francie, Saturday started with the trip to the junkie. She and her brother Neely, like other Brooklyn kids, collected rags, paper, metal, rubber, and other junk and hoarded it in locked cellar bins or in boxes hidden under the bed. All week, Francie walked home slowly from school with her eyes in the gutter, looking for tin foil from cigarette packages or chewing gum wrappers. This was melted in the lid of a jar. The junkie wouldn't take an unmelted ball of foil because too many kids put iron washes in the middle to make it way heavier. Sometimes Neely found a seltzer bottle. Francie helped him break the top off and melt it down for lead. The junkie wouldn't buy a complete top because he'd get into trouble with the soda water people. A seltzer bottle top was fine. Melted, it was worth a nickel. Francie and Neely went down into the cellar each evening and emptied the dumbwaiter shelves of the day's accumulated trash. Do you guys know what a dumbwaiter is? We have one in our apartment right now, but it doesn't work anymore. But this is a historic building. Let me take a quick break. Your best friend lives in Williamsburg. Oh, you love this illustration. Yeah, it's beautiful. They owned this privilege because Francie's mother was the janitress. They looted the shelves of paper, rags, and deposit bottles. Paper wasn't worth much. They got only a penny for 10 pounds. Rags brought 2 cents a pound and iron 4. Copper was good, 10 cents a pound. Sometimes Francie came across a bonanza, the bottom of a discarded wash boiler. She got it off with a can opener, folded it, folded it, and pounded it again. That would be copper, I think. Soon after 9 o'clock of a Sunday morning, kids began spraying out of all the side streets onto Manhattan Avenue, the main thoroughfare. They made their slow way up the avenue to Shoal Street. Some carried their junk in their arms. Others had wagons made of a wooden soapbox with solid wooden wheels. A few pushed loaded baby buggies. Francie and Neely put all their junk into a burlap bag and each grabbed an end and dragged it along the street, up Manhattan Avenue, past Mauger, Ten Eyck, Stagg to Shoals Street. Beautiful names for ugly streets. And I'm going to go ahead and show you this before we turn the page. So this is her on her fire escape. I actually don't know what kind of tree that is, so if anybody does know, put it in the chat. But I can kind of relate. Like, I feel like I've seen those out east when I used to live there. From each side street, hordes of little ragamuffins emerged to swell the main tide. On the way to Carney's, they met other kids coming back empty-handed. They had sold their junk and already squandered the pennies. Now swaggering back, they jeered at the other kids. Rag picker, rag picker. Francie's face burned at the name. No comfort knowing that the taunters were rag pickers too. No matter that her brother would straggle back empty-handed with his gang and taunt later comers the same way. Francie felt ashamed. Carney plied his junk business in a tumble-down stable. Turning the corner, Francie saw that both doors were hooked back hospitably, and she imagined that the large, bland dial of the swinging scale blinked a welcome. She saw Carney with his rusty hair, rusty mustache, and rusty eyes presiding at the scale. Carney liked girls better than boys. He would give a girl an extra penny if she did not shrink when he pinched her cheek. Because of the possibility of this bonus, Neely stepped aside and let Francie drag the bag into the stable. Carney jumped forward, dumped the contents of the bag on the floor, and took a preliminary pinch out of her cheek. While he piled the stuff onto the scale, Francie blinked, adjusting her eyes to the darkness, and was aware of the mossy air and the odor of wetted rags. Carney slewed his eyes at the dial and spoke 2 words, his offer. Francie knew that no dickering was permitted. She nodded yes, and Carney flipped the junk off and made her wait while he piled the paper in one corner, threw the rags in another, and sorted out the metals. Only then did he reach down in his pants pocket, haul up an old leather pouch, tied with a wax string, and count out old green pennies that looked like junk too. As she whispered thank you, Carney fixed a rusty, junked look on her and pinched her cheek hard. She stood her ground. He smiled and added an extra penny. Then his manner changed, and he became loud and brisk. "Come on," he hollered to the next one in line, a boy. "Get the lead out," he timed the laugh, "and I don't mean junk." The children laughed dutifully. The laughter sounded like the bleating of lost little lambs, but Carney seemed satisfied. Francie went outside to report her to her brother. He gave me 16 cents and a pinching penny. "That's your penny," he said, according to an old agreement. She put the penny in her dress pocket and turned the rest of the money over to him. Neely was 10, a year younger than Francie, but he was the boy. He handled the money. He divided the pennies carefully. 8 cents for the bank. That was the rule. Half of any money they got from anywhere went into the tin can bank that was nailed to the floor in the darkest corner of the closet. And 4 cents for you and 4 cents for me. Francie knotted the bank money in her handkerchief. She looked at her own 5 pennies, realizing happily that they could be changed into a whole nickel. Neely rolled up the burlap bag, tucked it under his arm, and pushed his way in Cheap Charlie's with Francie right behind him. Cheap Charlie's was the penny candy store next to Carney's, which catered to the junk trade. At the end of a Saturday, its cash box was filled with greenish pennies. By an unwritten law, it was a boys' store, so Francie did not go all the way in. She stood by the doorway. The boys from 8 to 14 years of age looked alike in straggling knickerbockers and broken peaked caps. They stood around, hands in pockets and thin shoulders hunched forward tensely. They would grow up looking like that, standing the same way in other hangouts. The only difference would be the cigarette, seemingly permanently fastened between their lips, rising and falling in accent as they spoke. Now the boys churned about nervously, their thin faces turning from Charlie to each other and back to Charlie again. Francie noticed that some already had their summer haircut, hair cropped so short that there were nicks in the scalp where the clippers had bitten too deeply. These fortunates had their caps crammed into their pockets or pushed back on the head. The unshorn ones, whose hair curled gently and still babyishly at the nape of the neck, were ashamed, and wore their caps pulled so far down over their ears that there was something girlish about them in spite of their jerky profanity. Cheap Charlie was not cheap, and his name wasn't Charlie. He had taken that name, and it said so on the store awning, and Francie believed it. Charlie gave you a pick for your penny. A board with 50 numbered hooks and a prize hanging from each hook, hung behind the counter. There were a few fine prizes. Roller skates, a catcher's mitt, a doll with real hair, and so on. The other hooks held blotters, pencils, and other penny articles. Francie watched as Neely bought a pick. He removed the dirty card from the ragged envelope. 26! Hopefully, Francie looked at the board. He had drawn a penny pen wiper. Prize or candy? Charlie asked him. Candy, what do you think? It was always the same. Francie had never heard of anyone winning above a penny prize. Indeed, the skate wheels were rusted and the doll's hair was dust-filmed, as though these things had waited there a long time, like Little Boy Blue's toy dog and tin soldier. Someday, Francie resolved, when she had 50 cents, she would take all the picks and win everything on the board. She figured that it would be a good business deal. Skates, mitt, doll, and all the other things for 50 cents. Why, the skates alone were worth 4 times that much. Neely would have to come along that great day because girls seldom patronized Charlie's. True, there were a few girls there that Saturday. Bold, brash ones, too developed for their age. Girls who talked loud and horseplayed around with the boys. Girls whom the neighbors prophesied would come to no good. Francie went across the street to Gimpy's candy store. Gimpy was lame. He was a gentleman, kind to little children. Or so everyone thought until that sunny afternoon when he inveigled a little girl into his dismal back room. Ooh, ouch. Francie debated whether she should sacrifice one of her pennies for a Gimpy special, the prize bag. Maudie Donovan, her once-in-a-while girlfriend, was about to make a purchase. Francie pushed her way in until she was standing behind Maudie. She pretended that she was spending the penny. She held her breath as Maudie, after much speculation, pointed dramatically at a bulging bag in the showcase. Francie would have picked a smaller bag. She looked over her friend's shoulder, saw her take out a few pieces of stale candy and examine her prize, a coarse cambric handkerchief. Once Francie had gotten a small bottle of strong scent. She debated again whether to spend a penny on a prize bag. It was nice to be surprised, even if you couldn't eat the candy. But she reasoned she had been surprised by being with Maudie when she made her purchase, and that was almost as good. Francie walked up Manhattan Avenue, reading aloud the fine-sounding names of the streets she passed. I don't know if you say Shoals or Scholes, Messerole, Montrose, and then Johnson Avenue. These last 2 avenues were where the Italians had settled. The district called Jewtown started at Siegel Street, took in Moore and McKibben, and went past Broadway. Francie headed for Broadway. And what was on Broadway in Williamsburg, Brooklyn? Nothing, only the finest nickel and dime store in all the world. It was big and glittering and had everything in the world in it, or so it seemed to an 11-year-old girl. Francie had a nickel. Francie had power. She could buy practically anything in that store. It was the only place in the world where that could be. Arriving at the store, she walked up and down the aisles, handling any object her fancy favored. What a wonderful feeling to pick something up, hold it for a moment, feel its contour, run her hand over its surface, and then replace it carefully. Her nickel gave her this privilege. If a floor walker asked whether she intended buying anything, she could say yes, buy it, and show him a thing or two. Money was a wonderful thing, she decided. After an orgy of touching things, she made her planned purchase, 5 cents worth of pink and white peppermint wafers. She walked back home down Graham Avenue, the ghetto street. She was excited by the filled pushcarts, each a little store in itself, the bargaining, emotional Jews, and the peculiar smells of the neighborhood. Baked stuffed fish, sour rye bread fresh from the oven, and something that smelled like honey boiling. She stared at the bearded men in their alpaca skull caps and silkoline coats and wondered what made their eyes so small and fierce. She looked into tiny hole-in-the-wall shops and smelled the dress fabrics arranged in disorder on the tables. She noticed the feather beds bellying out of windows, clothes of oriental bright colors drying on the fire escapes, and the half-naked children playing in the gutters. A woman, big with child, sat patiently at the curb in a stiff wooden chair. She sat in the hot sunshine, watching the life on the street and guarding within herself her own mystery of life. Francie remembered her surprise that time when Mama told her that Jesus was a Jew. Francie had thought that he was a Catholic, but Mama knew. Mama said that the Jews had never looked on Jesus as anything but a troublesome Yiddish boy who would not work at the carpentry trade, marry, settle down, and raise a family. And the Jews believed that their Messiah was yet to come, Mama said. Thinking of this, Francie stared at the pregnant Jewess. I guess that's why the Jews have so many babies, Francie thought, and why they sit so quiet, waiting. And why they aren't ashamed the way they are fat. Each one thinks that she might be making the real little Jesus. That's why they walk so proud when they're that way. Now the Irish women always look so ashamed. They know that they can never make a Jesus. It will just be another Mick. When I grow up and know that I am going to have a baby, I will remember to walk proud and slow, even though I am not a Jew. I'm going to take a quick break for some tea. So, yeah, the apologies. There's a lot of outdated attitudes and stuff in here, but it's very interesting to hear the way people thought in like the 1910s, you know? That cracker was dry. I'm going to need some more tea for that. Yeah, so this was published in 1945, but it's talking about, things that happened 30 years before. So, there's going to be, that's the whole point, right? There's going to be outdated attitudes. And like, of course, some stuff doesn't age well, but the author did a great job encapsulating how kids think about stuff like this. Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, kids. So it's a little simplistic. Okay, so next chapter. This is where it gets kind of interesting. We start learning about her family. It was 12 when Francie got home. Mama came in soon after with her broom and pail, which she banged into a corner with that final bang, which meant that they wouldn't be touched again till Monday. Mama was 29. She had black hair and brown eyes and was quick with her hands. She had a nice shape, too. She worked as a janitress and kept 3 tenement houses clean. Who would ever believe that Mama scrubbed floors to make a living for the 4 of them? She was so pretty and slight and vivid and always bubbling over with intensity and fun. Even though her hands were red and cracked from the sodaed water, they were beautifully shaped with lovely curved oval nails. Everyone said it was a pity that a slight pretty woman like Katie Nolan had to go out scrubbing floors. But what else could she do considering the husband she had, they said. They admitted that, no matter which way you looked at it, Johnny Nolan was a handsome, lovable fellow, far superior to any man on the block. But he was a drunk. That's what they said, and it was true. Francie made Mama watch while she put the 8 cents in the tin can bank. They had a pleasant 5 minutes conjecturing about how much was in the bank. Francie thought there must be nearly $100. Mama said $8 would be nearer right. Mama gave Francie instructions about going out to buy something for lunch. Take 8 cents from the cracked cup and get a quarter loaf of Jew rye bread and see that it's fresh. Then take a nickel, go to Sour Wines, and ask for the end of the tongue for a nickel. But you have to pull with him to get it. Tell him that your mother said, insisted Katie firmly. She thought something over. I wonder whether we ought to buy 5 cents worth of sugar buns or put that money in the bank. Oh, Mama, it's Saturday. All week you said we could have dessert on Saturday. All right, get the buns. The little Jewish delicatessen was full of Christians buying Jew rye bread. She watched the man push her quarter loaf into a paper bag. With its wonderful crisp yet tender crust and floury bottom, it was easily the most wonderful bread in the world, she thought, when it was fresh. She entered Sour Wine's store reluctantly. Sometimes he was agreeable about the tongue, and sometimes he wasn't. Sliced tongue at 75 cents a pound was only for rich people. But when it was nearly all sold, you could get the square end for a nickel if you had a pull with Mr. Sourwine. Of course, there wasn't much tongue to the end. It was mostly soft, small bones and gristle with only the memory of meat. It happened to be one of Sourwine's agreeable days. The tongue came to an end yesterday, he told Francie, but I saved it for you because I know your mama likes tongue and I like your mama. You tell her that, here? Yes, sir, whispered Francie. She looked down on the floor as she felt her face getting warm. She hated Mr. Sourwine and would not tell Mama what he had said. At the baker's, she picked out 4 buns, carefully choosing those with the most sugar. She met Neely outside the store. He peeped into the bag and cut a caper of delight when he saw the buns. Although he had eaten 4 cents worth of candy that morning, he was very hungry and made Francie run all the way home. Papa did not come home for dinner. He was a freelance singing waiter, which meant that he didn't work very often. Usually he spent Saturday morning at Union headquarters waiting for a job to come in for him. Francie, Neely, and Mama had a very fine meal. Each had a thick slice of the, quote, tongue, 2 pieces of sweet-smelling rye bread spread with unsalted butter, a sugar bun apiece, and a mug of strong hot coffee with a teaspoon of sweetened condensed milk on the side. There was a special Nolan idea about the coffee. It was their one great luxury. Mama made a big potful each morning and reheated it for dinner and supper, and it got stronger as the day wore on. It was an awful lot of water and very little coffee, but Mama put a lump of chicory in it, which made it taste strong and bitter. Each one was allowed 3 cups a day with milk. Other times you could help yourself to a cup of black coffee anytime you felt like it. Sometimes when you had nothing at all, and it was raining and you were alone in the flat, it was wonderful to know that you could have something, even though it was only a cup of black and bitter coffee. Neely and Francie loved coffee, but seldom drank it. Today, as usual, Neely let his coffee stand black and ate his condensed milk spread on bread. He sipped a little of the black coffee for the sake of formality. Mama poured out Francie's coffee and put the milk in it, even though she knew that the child wouldn't drink it. Francie loved the smell of coffee and the way it was hot. As she ate her bread and meat, she kept one hand curved about the cup, enjoying its warmth. From time to time, she'd smell the bitter sweetness of it. That was better than drinking it. At the end of the meal, it went down the sink. Mama had 2 sisters, Sissy and Evie, who came to the flat often. Every time they saw the coffee thrown away, they gave Mama a lecture about wasting things. Or is it Evie? E-V-Y. I guess it's probably Evie. So one of the reasons that this hits home for me is my mom's name is Eva, and she kind of, this character of Katie Nolan really reminds me of my mom quite a bit. So anyway, that's one reason why this really resonated for me. Mama explained, Francie is entitled to 1 cup each meal like the rest. If it makes her better to throw it away rather than to drink it, all right. I think it's good that people like us can waste something once in a while and get the feeling of how it would be to have lots of money and not have to worry about scrounging. This queer point of view satisfied Mama and pleased Francie. It was one of the links between the ground-down poor and the wasteful rich. The girl felt that even if she had less than anybody in Williamsburg, somehow she had more. She was richer because she had something to waste. She ate her sugar bun slowly, reluctant to have done with its sweet taste, while the coffee got ice cold. Regally, she poured it down the sink drain, feeling casually extravagant. After that, she was ready to go to Loescher's for the family's semi-weekly supply of stale bread. Mama told her that she could take a nickel and buy a stale pie if she could get one that wasn't mashed too much. Loescher's bread factory supplied the neighborhood stores. The bread was not wrapped in wax paper and grew stale quickly. Loescher's redeemed the stale bread from the dealers and sold it at half price to the poor. The outlet store adjoined the bakery. Its long, narrow counter filled one side, and long, narrow benches ran along the other 2 sides. A huge double door opened behind the counter. The bakery wagons backed up to it and unloaded the bread right onto the counter. They sold 2 loaves for a nickel, and when it was dumped out, a pushing crowd fought for the privilege of buying it. There was never enough bread, and some waited until 3 or 4 wagons had reported before they could buy bread. At that price, the customers had to supply their own wrappings. Most of the purchasers were children. Some kids tucked the bread under their own arms and walked home brazenly, letting all the world know that they were poor. The proud ones wrapped up the bread, some in old newspapers, others in clean or dirty flour sacks. Francie brought along a large paper bag. She didn't try to get her bread right away. She sat on a bench and watched. A dozen kids pushed and shouted at the counter. 4 old men dozed on the opposite bench. The old men, pensioners on their families, were made to run errands and mind babies, the only work left for old, worn-out men in Williamsburg. They waited as long as they could before buying because Loescher smelled kindly of baking bread, and the sun coming in the windows felt good on their old backs. They sat and dozed while the hours passed and felt that they were filling up time. The waiting gave them a purpose in life for a little while, and almost they felt necessary again. Francie stared at the oldest man. She played her favorite game, figuring out about people. His thin, tangled hair was the same dirty gray as the stubble standing on his sunken cheeks. Dried spittle caked the corners of his mouth. He yawned. He had no teeth. She watched, fascinated and revolted, as he closed his mouth, drew his lips inward until there was no mouth, and made his chin come up almost to meet his nose. She studied his old coat with the padding hanging out of the torn sleeve seam. His legs were sprawled wide in helpless relaxation, and one of the buttons was missing from his grease-caked pants opening. She saw that his shoes were battered and broken open at the toes. One shoe was laced with a much-knotted shoestring, and the other with a bit of dirty twine. She saw 2 thick, dirty toes with creased gray toenails. Her thoughts ran, "He is old. He must be past 70. He was born about the time Abraham Lincoln was living and getting himself ready to be president. Williamsburg must have been a little country place then, and maybe Indians were still living in Flatbush. That was so long ago." She kept staring at his feet. He was a baby once. He must have been sweet and clean, and his mother kissed his little pink toes. Maybe when it thundered at night, she came into his crib and fixed his blanket better and whispered that he mustn't be afraid that mother was there. Then she picked him up and put her cheek on his head and said that he was her own sweet baby. He might have been a boy like my brother, running in and out of the house and slamming the door. And while his mother scolded him, she was thinking that maybe he'll be president someday. Then he was a young man, strong and happy. When he walked down the street, the girls smiled and turned to watch him. He smiled back, and maybe he winked at the prettiest one. I guess he must have married and had children, and they thought he was the most wonderful papa in the world, the way he worked hard and bought them toys for Christmas. Now his children are getting old too, like him, and they have children, and nobody wants the old man anymore, and they are waiting for him to die. But he don't want to die. He wants to keep on living, even though he's so old and there's nothing to be happy about anymore. The place was quiet. The summer sun streamed in and made dusty, down slanting roads from the window to the floor. A big green fly buzzed in and out of the sunny dust. Excepting for herself and the dozing old man, the place was empty. The children who waited for bread had gone to play outside. Their high screaming voices seemed to come from far away. Suddenly, Francie jumped up. Her heart was beating fast. She was frightened. For no reason at all, she thought of an accordion pulled out full for a rich note. Then she had an idea that the accordion was closing. A terrible panic that had no name came over her as she realized that many of the sweet babies in the world were born to come to something like this old man someday. She had to get out of that place or it would happen to her. Suddenly she would be an old woman with toothless gums and feet that disgusted people. At that moment, the double doors behind the counter were banged open as a bread truck backed up. A man came to stand behind the counter. The truck driver started throwing bread to him, which he piled up on the counter. The kids in the street who had heard the doors thrown open piled in and milled around Francie, who had already reached the counter. "I want bread," Francie called out. A big girl gave her a strong shove and wanted to know who she thought she was. Never mind, Francie told her. "I want 6 loaves and a pie not too crushed," she screamed out. Impressed by her intensity, the counterman shoved 6 loaves and the least battered of the rejected pies at her and took her 2 dimes. She pushed her way out of the crowd, dropping the loaf, which she had no trouble picking up as there was no room to, which she had trouble picking up, as there was no room to stoop over in. Outside, she sat at the curb, fitting the bread and the pie into the paper bag. A woman passed, wheeling a baby in a buggy. The baby was waving his feet in the air. Francie looked and saw not the baby's foot, but a grotesque thing in a big worn out shoe. The panic came on her again, and she ran all the way home. The flat was empty. Mama had dressed and gone off with Aunt Sissy to see a matinee from a 10-cent gallery seat. Francie put the bread and pie away and folded the bag neatly to be used the next time. She went into the tiny windowless bedroom that she shared with Neely and sat on her own cot in the dark, waiting for the waves of panic to stop passing over her. After a while, Neely came in, crawled under his cot, and pulled out a ragged catcher's mitt. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Play ball in the lots." "Can I come along?" "No." She followed him down the street. 3 of his gang were waiting for him. One had a bat, another a baseball, and the third had nothing but wore a pair of baseball pants. They started out for an empty lot over towards Greenpoint. Neely saw Francie following, but said nothing. One of the boys nudged him and said, "Hey, your sister's following us." "Yeah," agreed Neely. The boy turned around and yelled at Francie, "Go chase yourself." "It's a free country," Francie stated. "It's a free country," Neely repeated to the boy. They took no notice of Francie after that. She continued to follow them. She had nothing to do until 2 o'clock when the neighborhood library opened up again. It was a slow, horse-playing walk. The boys stopped to look for tinfoil in the gutter and to pick up cigarette butts, which they would save and smoke in the cellar on the next rainy afternoon. They took time out to bedevil a little Jew boy on his way to the temple. They detained him while they debated what to do with him. The boy waited, smiling humbly. The Christians released him finally with detailed instructions as to his course of conduct for the coming week. "Don't show your puss on DeVoe Street," he was ordered. "I won't," he promised. The boys were disappointed. They had expected more fight. One of them took out a bit of chalk from his pocket and drew a wavy line on the sidewalk. He commanded, "Don't you even step over that line." The little boy, knowing that he had offended them by giving in too easily, decided to play their way. "Can't I even put 1 foot in the gutter, fellers?" "You can't even spit in the gutter," he was told. "All right," he sighed in pretended resignation. One of the bigger boys had an inspiration. "And keep away from Christian girls. Get me?" They walked away, leaving him staring after them. "Golly," he whispered, rolling his big brown Jewish eyes. The idea about those goyim thought him man enough to be capable of thinking about any girl, Gentile or Jew, staggered him, and he went his way saying, "Golly," over and over. The boys walked on slowly, looking slyly at the big boy who had made the remark about the girls, and wondering whether he would lead off into a dirty talk session. But before this could start, Francie heard her brother say, "I know that kid. He's a white Jew." Neely had heard Papa speak so of a Jewish bartender that he liked. "They ain't no such thing as a white Jew," said the big boy. "Well, if there was such a thing as a white Jew," said Neely, with that combination of agreeing with others and still sticking to his own opinions, which made him so amiable, "he would be it." "There never could be a white Jew," said the big boy, "even in supposing." "Our Lord was a Jew," Neely was quoting Mama. "And other Jews turned right around and killed him," clinched the big boy. Before they could go deeper in theology, they saw another little boy turn onto Ainsley Street from Humboldt Street, carrying a basket on his arm. The basket was covered with a clean, ragged cloth. A stick stuck up from one corner of the basket, and on it, like a sluggish flag, stood 6 pretzels. The big boy of Neely's gang gave a command, and they made a tightly packed run on the pretzel seller. He stood his ground, opened his mouth, and bawled, "Mama!" A second-story window flew open, and a woman clutching a crepe paperish kimono around her, or this actually said kimono, around her sprawling breast, yelled out, "Leave him alone and get off his block, you lousy bastards." This block. Francie's hands flew to cover her ears so that at confession she would not have to tell the priest that she had stood and listened to a bad word. "Sorry, I lost my place. We ain't doing nothing, lady," said Neely with that ingratiating smile which always won over his mother. "You bet your life you ain't, not while I'm around." Then, without changing her tone, she called to her son, "And get upstairs here, you. I'll learn you to bother me when I'm taking a nap." The pretzel boy went upstairs and the gang ambled on. "That lady's tough," the big boy jerked his head back at the window. "Yeah," the others agreed. "My old man's tough," offered a smaller boy. "Who Who the hell cares? Inquired the big boy languidly. I was just saying, apologized the smaller boy. My old man ain't tough, said Neely. The boys laughed. They ambled along, stopping now and then to breathe deeply of the smell of Newton Creek, which flowed its narrow, tormented way a few blocks up Grand Street. God, she stinks, commented the big boy. Yeah, Neely sounded deeply satisfied. I bet that's the worst stink in the world, bragged another boy. Yeah. And Francie whispered, yeah, in agreement. She was proud of that smell. It let her know that nearby was a waterway, which, dirty though it was, joined a river that flowed out to the sea. To her, the stupendous stench suggested far-sailing ships and adventure, and she was pleased with the smell. Just as the boys reached the lot in which there was a ragged diamond tramped out, a little yellow butterfly flew across the weeds. With man's instinct to capture anything running, flying, swimming, or crawling, they gave chase, throwing their ragged caps at it in advance of their coming. Neely caught it. The boys looked at it briefly, quickly lost interest in it, and started up a four-man baseball game of their own devising. They played furiously, cursing, sweating, and punching each other. Every time a stumblebum passed and loitered for a moment, they clowned and showed off. There was a rumor that the Brooklyn Dodgers had 100 scouts roaming the streets of a Saturday afternoon, watching lot games and spotting promising players. And there wasn't a Brooklyn boy who wouldn't rather play on the Bums team than be president of the United States. After a while, Francie got tired of watching them. She knew that they would play and fight and show off until it was time to drift home for supper. It was 2:00. The librarian should be back from lunch by now. With pleasant anticipation, Francie walked back toward the library. Okay, going to take a quick break here. What do you think of it? It's kind of, there's definitely some, shall we say, negativity and hard stuff in there, but I hope you find it interesting. I must have been a strange youngster myself with the fact that I found it relatable about the girl and the panic attacks and the, imagining about the old man. And anyway, I don't know why I wasn't horrified by that when I was younger, but I found it very interesting and relatable. All right, gonna open another peanut butter treat while maybe they're not melted. Let's see how we do with this one. I want bread, never mind. Love that energy. Yeah. There's also a lot of food in this book, so I thought that might be interesting. One of the things I thought about that I found the most interesting about it overall was the descriptions of the things that they made out of not very much food. And there's a lot more of that to come. Okay, this one looks better. It's not melty. You can kind of get a feel for like what it looks like. And then the wafer, you can see more on the bottom here. It's like one of those sort of, what do you call that? Like the little crisscross waffle, like a waffle-y wafer thing. And then there's like peanuts glommed on with chocolate. This doesn't seem to have any caramel. It's just chocolate and peanuts and then peanut butter inside. Have you ever seen the movie The Florida Project? It kind of has that energy. Little kids running around and making the most through tough socioeconomic situations. Let me say that again, socioeconomic situations. So no, I have not. At least I don't think I have. Okay, I love chocolate and peanuts together. Or peanuts and anything, frankly. But again, going forward, I probably will just buy more. If I buy any peanut butter treats, they might be Reese's. But what I love about this is just the small serving size. It is pretty good though, especially when it's not so melty. Okay, gonna make more hot tea, which probably would be better than my tea is currently cold. I don't mind, but I just realized you cannot see what's going on at all because I zoomed in, but off to the right is my teapot. And then I'll be pouring into this pitcher. I'll scoot this over a little bit so you can see that when the time comes. And of course we have our leaf strainer, which is quickly wearing out. The other one already broke. So I don't think I would. Here, I can scoot this closer to me. Gently, carefully. A little bit better that way. I wouldn't say that I grew up like poor. Like we always had enough food to eat. But my mom was she was a single, my parents got divorced. She worked two or even like two jobs in a freelance gig all at the same time, trying to take care of us. So she literally had a day job, a night job. It was, I don't know, I can't even imagine doing that. No wonder she was so tired all the time and frankly kind of cranky. And so one of the things that really resonates with me is the thing about the coffee, because she was a big fan of like those indulgences, that didn't cost too much money but made you feel like you had stuff. Why is my camera moving? I'm going to tighten a couple of knobs here to make sure it's not. Oh, it is all nice and tight. Anyway, so yeah, we kind of had that situation where, we definitely had to do more with less. But she was really the the driver of that, I'm going to give our tea pet some tea while we're here. Well, you're just looking down on top of his head. One of the things I like about this smaller tea tray is that I can just sort of slide it in and out of the camera scene, like when we're zoomed in more. So I've got this tea that's turned a little bit cold. So you can see our piggy here on the little lotus flower there. That's part of this tea tray. Oh, my kettle just turned off. Really liking this towel. It actually kind of has a smoother surface on this side, so I can actually slide the tray in and out. That's not what it's for. It's just for being a tea towel and being attractive. The other side is the actual towel part. It's just like a gray microfiber towel. You can see that. Yes, absolutely. When we got out of college, we were living very cheap, and I would eat rice and beans for literally every meal, but I would get a Hershey's cookie and cream bar once or twice a week to nibble on. Yeah, my mom was like, she was like that about a lot of things. Like she was one of those people that, wished she could wear better clothes or, but she was economical about it as I am. As I always kind of have been. I guess that's where I learned it, but she wanted to dress better. She had good taste, and then she would do things, I kid you not, she would do things like buy a used Lincoln Town car, that was cheap, but was a fancy car. Was it a Lincoln Town car? Yeah, I think we had a used Cadillac at one point. We had a Lincoln Town car. And then later, when she actually had to buy a new car, she bought a Renault Le Car, which was like the cheapest car you could get new, and that was a real departure for her because she was like, she just liked the bigger, fancier cars because it felt fancier, I guess. Oh, God, I'm just kind of smiling, remembering that. And even as busy as she was, she would make, economical meals. From time to time, she would make, large quantities of stuff like pasta sauce or stuff to put in the freezer. At one point, we had a garden where she could grow vegetables, so she always tried to be economical. I'm going to go ahead and munch these two crackers since they're open, or at least one of them. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in this book about making do. And reading it, in some ways, maybe reading it when I was younger made me kind of feel like, oh, well, our situation's not that bad. I mean, we're not living on stale bread. So, having another, I just realized you can't really see these blueberries. They're probably just going directly from the bowl into my mouth, and you're not seeing them. There they are. These crackers are really good. They're, like I said, they're a bit oily. They feel like an indulgence. Like, what they remind me of is like when you get at a Chinese restaurant, you get the scallion pancake. They taste kind of like the scallion pancake, and they also have that oily feeling to them. But the texture is more like there you go. Kind of like a hard but flaky. Somewhere between crispy and crunchy. I want to try to do that too. Clothing can be really tough for me as a plus size person, and part of me wants to just give up the ghost and make my own clothes. But we can't sew. Yeah, my mom could sew. She did actually make some clothes for us, but really it wasn't the norm. I'm trying to think of what she ever made. It was definitely not the norm. It's not like I went back to school with a homemade, home sewn wardrobe or anything like that. She had learned in school, in home ec class or whatever they had back then in the 50s, 60s, early 60s, I guess. And she had made some aprons, that type of thing. I have some sewing skills, but I know how to work a sewing machine. I have not I've made a couple articles of clothing, but they're very, very simple, just like a shirt, like a pullover top. And Mr. Oolong can sew though. He's really good at mending. Oh, I know how to, hem pants and the like. The Mister here is actually good with a sewing machine, although he doesn't really make clothing either, but he you know why? Because his legs are short, so he has to hem a lot of pants, or they're just too long. He has a very short inseam. His legs are short. He's not short, but his legs are short, if you know what I mean. So he has to hem a lot of pants. It's almost impossible to find pants with the right inseam, so he hems a lot. But he also repairs things and stuff, and so I don't really have to do it. Sometimes or even for the household, like he can make like a couch cover. I'm just looking around to see what he has made. Pillow covers, slip covers for pillow shams and things like that. Just simple, like out of canvas, not like fancy or anything. But we have this day bed that we used to use as a sofa, and it's now in the second bedroom. We bought a mattress for it that was nicer than the mattress it came with. But then, since it could be so that it could be a sofa, we made a cover for the mattress. And we're both really, really fond of cotton duck, which is it's a type of canvas. And it's very sturdy, but it has like this really nice texture to it. And it's pretty easy to work with, and it's not too expensive, and it washes really well, et cetera, et cetera. So, he has made 2 different covers over the years for the day bed, and then some matching, we bought some bed pillows, and then those were like the pillows that went across the back. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, my sister-in-law roommate is getting into embroidery, so maybe that's a good stepping stone. That's so cool. Good for him. Yeah, we in our household are picky about textures of fabric. Yeah, I don't Yeah, it's I don't know why, but cotton duck. Look into it. It's like a really comfortable canvas fabric. It's like it's soft, but it's still durable. I don't know what it is about it, but it's called duck, like the bird. You're writing it down. I think the 9 ounce weight is not. It's heavy enough to be durable, but it's not stiff. So it comes in different weights. You just rushed over to your notepad. Can't you just can't type because you just rushed over to start taking notes, right? I get it. Okay, how are we doing for time? Well, we've got to read the chapter where she goes to the library. I mean, that's kind of a whole thing, right? Some of the chapters are super short, like this one looks like it's just a couple pages. So let's just see how we do. We're on chapter 2. The first chapter was fairly long. That whole thing that we've read was the first chapter. So okay, moving on. The library was a little old shabby place. Francie thought it was beautiful. The feeling she had about it was as good as the feeling she had about church. She pushed open the door and went in. She liked the combined smell of worn leather bindings, library paste, and freshly inked stamping pads better than she liked the smell of burning incense at High Mass. Francie thought that all the books in the world were in that library, and she had a plan about reading all the books in the world. She was reading a book a day in alphabetical order and not skipping the dry ones. She remembered that the first author had been Abbott, Abbott. She had been reading a book a day for a long time now, and she was still in the bees. Already she had read about bees and buffaloes, Bermuda vacations, and Byzantine architecture. For all her enthusiasm, she had to admit that some of the bees had been hard going. But Francie was a reader. She read everything she could find: trash, classics, timetables, and the grocer's price list. Some of the reading had been wonderful. The Louisa Alcott books, for example. She planned to read all the books over again when she had finished with the Z's. Saturdays were different. She treated herself by reading a book not in the alphabetical sequence. On that day, she asked the librarian to recommend a book. Yeah, this really reminds me of myself as a kid. I think if I had thought of reading all the books in alphabetical order, I would have tried to do that. I didn't think of that. But I did organize my books at home, that I had 100 books by the time I was 8, and I did make a library using the Dewey Decimal System. I kid you not. I probably mentioned that before, but like I was a super book lover as a kid. Yeah. You're obsessed with the name Francie. It's so cute. Yeah. After Francie had come in and closed the door quietly behind her, the way you were supposed to do in the library, she looked quickly at the little golden brown pottery jug which stood at the end of the librarian's desk. It was a season indicator. In the fall, it held a few sprigs of bittersweet, and at Christmas time, it held holly. She knew spring was coming, even if there was snow on the ground, when she saw Pussy Willow in the bowl. And today, on this summer Saturday of 1912, what was the bowl holding? She moved her eyes slowly up the jug, past the thin green stems and little round leaves, and saw nasturtiums, red, yellow, gold, and ivory white. A head pain caught her between the eyes at the taking in of such a wonderful sight. It was something to be remembered all her life. When I get big, she thought, I will have such a brown bowl, and in hot August there will be nasturtiums in it. She put her hand on the edge of the polished desk, liking the way it felt. She looked at the neat row of freshly sharpened pencils, the clean green square of blotter, the fat white jar of creamy paste, the precise stack of cards, and the return books waiting to be put back on the shelves. The remarkable pencil with the date slug above its point was by itself near the blotter's edge. I do not know what that is, the pencil with the date slug above its point. I don't know if anyone knows what that is. Yes, when I get big and have my own home, no plush chairs and lace curtains for me. and no rubber plants. I'll have a desk like this in my parlor, and white walls and a clean green blotter every Saturday night, and a row of shining yellow pencils always sharpened for writing, and a golden brown bowl with a flower or some leaves or berries always in it, and books, books, books. She chose her book for Sunday, something by an author named Brown. Francie figured she had been reading on the Browns for months. When she thought she was nearly finished, she noticed that the next shelf started up again with Brown, ending with an E. After that came Browning. She groaned, anxious to get into the C's, where there was a book by Marie Corelli that she had peeped into and found thrilling. Would she ever get to that? Maybe she ought to read 2 books a day. Maybe... She stood at the desk a long time before the librarian deigned to attend to her. Yes, inquired that lady pettishly. This book, I want it. Francie pushed the book forward, opened at the back with the little card pushed out of the envelope. The librarians had trained the children to present the books that way. It saved them the trouble of opening several hundred books a day and pulling several hundred cards out from as many envelopes. She took the card, stamped it, pushed it down a slot in the desk. She stamped Francie's card and pushed it at her. Francie picked it up, but she did not go away. Yes, the librarian did not bother to look up. Could you recommend a good book for a girl? How old? She is 11. Each week, Francie made the same request, and each week the librarian asked the same question. A name on a card meant nothing to her, and since she never looked up into a child's face, she never did get to know the little girl who took a book out every day and 2 on Saturday. A smile would have meant a lot to Francie, and a friendly comment would have made her so happy. She loved the library and was anxious to worship the lady in charge. But the librarian had other things on her mind. She hated children anyhow. Francie trembled in anticipation as the woman reached under the desk. She saw the title as the book came up. If I Were King by McCarthy. Wonderful. Last week it had been Beverly of Graustark, and the same 2 weeks before that. She had had the McCarthy book only twice. The librarian recommended these 2 books over and over again. Maybe they were the only ones she herself had read. Maybe they were on a recommended list. Maybe she had discovered that they were surefire as far as 11-year-old girls were concerned. Francie held the books close and hurried home, resisting the temptation to sit down on the first stoop she came to and start reading. Home at last, and now it was the time she had been looking forward to all week. Fire escape sitting time. She put a small rug on the fire escape and got the pillow from her bed and propped it against the bars. Luckily, there was ice in the ice box. She chipped off a small piece and put it in a glass of water. The pink and white peppermint wafers bought that morning were arranged in a little bowl, cracked, but of a pretty blue color. She arranged glass, bowl, and book on the windowsill and climbed out onto the fire escape. Once out there, she was living in a tree. No one upstairs, downstairs, or across the way could see her, but she could look out through the leaves and see everything. It was a sunny afternoon. A lazy warm wind carried a warm sea smell. The leaves of the tree made fugitive patterns on the white pillowcase. Nobody was in the yard, and that was nice. Usually it was preempted by the boy whose father rented the store on the ground floor. The boy played an interminable game of graveyard. He dug miniature graves, put live captured caterpillars into little matchboxes, buried them with informal ceremony, and erected little pebble headstones over the tiny earth mounds. The whole game was accompanied by fake sobbings and heavings of his chest. But today the dismal boy was away visiting an aunt in Bensonhurst. To know that he was away was almost as good as getting a birthday present. Francie breathed of warm air, watched the dancing leaf shadows, ate the candy, and took sips of the cooled water in between reading the book. If I were king, love, ah, if I were king. Honestly, this book is so cozy and intimate, and I'm truly obsessed. It's kind of grim, though, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of raw, but it is intimate, yeah. Not the caterpillars. It's the sobbing for me. The story of Francois Villon was more wonderful each time she read it. Sometimes she worried for fear the book would be lost in the library and she'd never be able to read it again. She had once started copying the book in a 2-cent notebook. She wanted to own a book so badly, and she had thought the copying would do it. But the penciled sheets did not seem like nor smell like the library books, so she had given it up, consoling herself with the vow that when she grew up, she would work hard, save money, and buy every single book that she liked. As she read, at peace with the world and happy as only a little girl could be with a fine book and a little bowl of candy, and all alone in the house, the leaf shadows shifted and the afternoon passed. About 4 o'clock, the flats and the tenements across from Francie's yard came to life. Through the leaves, she looked into the open, uncurtained windows and saw growlers being rushed out and returned overflowing with cool, foaming beer. Kids ran in and out, going to and returning from the butchers, the grocers, and the bakers. Women came in with bulky hock shop bundles. The man's Sunday suit was home again. On Monday, it would go back to the pawnbrokers for another week. The hock shop prospered on the weekly interest money, and the suit benefited by being brushed and hung away in camphor where the moths couldn't get at it. In on Monday, out on Saturday. 10 cents interest paid to Uncle Timmy. That was the cycle. Francie saw young girls making preparations to go out with their fellers. Since none of the flats had bathrooms, the girls stood before the kitchen sinks in their camisoles and petticoats, and the line the arm made curved over the head while they washed under their arm was very beautiful. There were so many girls and so many windows washing this way that it seemed a kind of hushed and expectant ritual. She stopped reading when Fraber's horse and wagon came into the yard next door, because watching the beautiful horse was almost as good as reading. The next door yard was cobblestoned and had a good-looking stable at the end of it. A wrought iron double gate separated the yard from the street. At the edge of the cobblestones was a bit of well-manured earth where a lovely rose bush grew, and a row of bright red geraniums. The stable was finer than any house in the neighborhood, and the yard was the prettiest in Williamsburg. Francie heard the gate click shut. The horse, a shining brown gelding with a black mane and tail, came into view first. He pulled a small maroon wagon that had Dr. Fraber, dentist, and the address painted on the sides in golden letters. This trim wagon delivered nothing and carried nothing. It was driven slowly through the streets all day as an advertisement. It was a dreamily moving billboard. Frank, a nice young man with rosy cheeks, like the fabulous youth in the children's song, took the wagon out every morning and brought it back every afternoon. He had a fine life, and all the girls flirted with him. All he had to do was drive the wagon around slowly, so that people could read the name and address on it. When it came to a set of plates or the pulling of a tooth, the people would remember the address on the wagon and come to Dr. Fraber. Frank leisurely removed his coat and donned a leather apron while Bob the horse patiently shifted from one foot to the other. Frank then unharnessed him, wiped off the leather, and hung the harness up in the stable. Next, he washed the horse with a great wet yellow sponge. The horse enjoyed it. He stood there with the sunshine dappling him over, and sometimes his hooves struck a spark from the stones as he pawed the ground. Frank squeezed water out onto the brown back and rubbed it down, talking to the big horse all the while. "Steady now, Bob. That's a good boy. Back up there. Whoa, now." Bob was not the only horse in Francie's life. Her Aunt Evie's husband, Uncle Willie Flitman, also drove a horse. His horse was named Drummer and pulled a milk wagon. Willie and Drummer were not friends the way Frank and his horse were friends. Willie and Drummer lay in wait for each other, figuring out injuries to do the other. Uncle Willie reviled Drummer by the hour. To hear him talk, you would think that the horse never slept at night, but stood awake in the milk company stable, figuring out new torments for his driver. Francie liked to play a game in which she imagined that people looked like their pets and vice versa. Little white poodles were favorite pets in Brooklyn. The woman who owned a poodle was usually small, plump, white, soiled, and with roomy eyes, just like a poodle. Miss Tinmore, the tiny, bright, chirping old maid who gave Mama music lessons, was just like the canary whose cage hung in her kitchen. If Frank could turn into a horse, he'd look like Bob. Francie had never seen Uncle Willie's horse, but she knew what he looked like. Drummer, like Willie, would be small and thin and dark, with nervous eyes which showed too much white. He'd be whimpery too, like Aunt Evie's husband. She let her thoughts go away from Uncle Flipman. Out on the street, a dozen small boys clung to the iron gate, watching the neighborhood's only horse being washed. Francie couldn't see them, but she heard them talking. They made up fearful stories about the gentle animal. Oh my God, I love that imagery of a poodle owner. Yeah. Don't he look still and easy, a boy said, but that's only a fake. He's laying his chance for when Frank ain't looking. Then he'll bite him and kick him to death. Yeah, said another boy. I seen him run over a little baby yesterday. A third boy had an inspiration. I seen him do number one on an old lady sitting by the gutter selling apples. All over the apples, too, he added as an afterthought. They put them blinkers on him so's he can't see how little people is. If he could see how small they is, he would kill them all. Them blinkers make him think little people is little? Little like peewees. Gee! Each boy, as he spoke, knew that he was lying. Yet he believed what the other boys said about the horse. Eventually, the boys tired of watching Gentle Bob just stand there. One of them picked up a stone and threw it at the horse. Bob's skin rippled where it struck him, and the boys shivered in anticipation of his going berserk. Frank looked up and spoke to them in a gentle Brooklyn voice. You don't want to go and do that now. The horse didn't do nothing to you. Oh, no, shouted a boy indignantly. No, answered Frank. Ah, go blank yourself, came the inevitable coup de grace from the smallest boy. Still gently spoke Frank, as if he let a rill of water run over the horse's rump. Do you want to go away from here, or do I have to break a couple of your asses? I'll show you who else. Suddenly Frank swooped down and picked up a loose cobblestone and squared off as it... Oh, I'm sorry. You and who else? I'll show you who else. Suddenly Frank swooped down and picked up a loose cobblestone and squared off as if to throw it. The boys backed away, hollering out offended retorts. I guess this is a free country. Yeah, you don't own the streets. I'm going to tell my uncle the cop on you. Beat it now, said Frank indifferently. He replaced the cobblestone carefully. I love that these kids think this horse is completely psychotic. Yeah. The big boys drifted away, tired of the game, but the little boys seeped back. They wanted to see Frank give Bob his oats. Frank finished washing the horse and stood him under the tree, where his head was in the shade. He hung a filled feed bag on his neck. Then he went to work washing the wagon, whistling, Let Me Call You Sweetheart. As if this was a signal, Flossie Gaddis, who lived below the Nolans, stuck her head out of the window. Hello there, she called vivaciously. Frank knew who called. He waited a long time and then answered, hello, without looking up. He walked around to the other side of the wagon where Flossie couldn't see him, but her persistent voice followed. Done for the day? She asked brightly. Soon, yeah. I guess you're going out sporting, being it's a Saturday night tonight. No answer. Don't tell me a good-looking feller like you ain't got no girl. No answer. They're running a racket tonight at the Shamrock Club. Yeah, he didn't sound interested. Yeah, I got a ticket admitting lady and gent. Sorry, I'm all tied up. Staying home to keep your old lady company? Maybe. Ah, go to hell. She slammed the window down and Frank breathed a sigh of relief. That was over. Francie felt sorry for Flossie. She never gave up hope, no matter how many times she lost out with Frank. Flossie was always running after men, and they were always running away from her. Francie's Aunt Sissy ran after men, too, but somehow they ran to meet her halfway. The difference was that Flossie Gaddis was starved about men, and Sissy was healthily hungry about them, and what a difference that made. Get it, Frank? She tried to do so much investigating. Yeah, she was a little, I think today's word would be thirsty. She's a little too thirsty. All right, my kettle went off and so I'm going to get some more hot water. And we haven't had an actual BRB break. She's parched. Yeah, poor Flossie. She is definitely featured throughout the book, so you'll see her again. Papa came home at 5:00. By that time, the horse and wagon had been locked up in Fraber's stable. Francie had finished her book and her candy and had noted how pale and thin the late afternoon sun was on the worn fence boards. She held the sun-warmed, wind-freshened pillow to her cheek a moment before she replaced it on her cot. Papa came in singing his favorite ballad, Molly Malone. He always sang it coming up the stairs so that everyone would know he was home. And actually, I don't really remember how this goes tune wise. You guys know? It's something like, anyway, it says, in Dublin's fair city, the girls are so pretty. That's there that I first met, or 'twas there that I first met. And that's where it usually says, 'twas there that I first met sweet Molly Malone. Francie, smilingly happy, had the door open before he could sing the next line. Where's your mother? He asked. He always asked that when he came in. She went to the show with Sissy. Oh, he sounded disappointed. He was always disappointed if Katie wasn't there. I work at Clommer's tonight, big wedding party. He brushed his derby with his coat sleeve before he hung it up. Waiting or singing? Francie asked. Both. Have I got a clean waiter's apron, Francie? There's one cleaned but not ironed. I'll iron it for you. She set up the ironing board on 2 chairs and put the iron to heat. She got a square of thick, wrinkled duck duck! There's the duck material. She got a square of thick, wrinkled duck material with linen tape ties and sprinkled it. While she waited for the iron to get hot, she heated the coffee and poured him a cup. He drank it and ate the sugar bun that they had saved for him. He was very happy because he had a job that night and because it was a nice day. A day like this is like somebody giving you a present, he said. Yes, Papa. Isn't hot coffee a wonderful thing? How did people get along before it was invented? I like the way it smells. Where did you buy these buns? Winkler's. Why? They make them better every day. There's some Jew bread left, a piece. Fine. He took the slice of bread and turned it over. The Union sticker was on that piece. Good bread, well made by Union bakers. He pulled the sticker off. A thought struck him. The Union label on my apron. It's right here, sewn in the seam. I'll iron it out. That label is like an ornament, he explained. Like a rose that you wear. Look at my waiter's Union button. The pale green and white button was fastened in his lapel. He polished it with his sleeve. Before I joined the union, the bosses paid me what they felt like. Sometimes they paid me nothing. The tips, they said, would take care of me. Some places even charged me for the privilege of working. The tips were so big, they said, that they could sell the waiting concession. Then I joined the union. Your mother shouldn't begrudge the dues. The union gets me jobs where the boss has to pay me certain wages regardless of tips. All trades should be unionized. Yes, Papa. By now, Francie was ironing away. She loved to hear him talk. Francie thought of the union headquarters. One time she had gone there to bring him an apron and car fare to go to a job. She saw him sitting with some men. He wore his tuxedo all the time. It was the only suit he had. His black derby was cocked jauntily, and he was smoking a cigar. He took his hat off and threw the cigar away when he saw Francie come in. My daughter, he said proudly. The waiters looked at the thin child in her ragged dress and then exchanged glances. They were different from Johnny Nolan. They had regular waiter jobs during the week and picked up extra money on Saturday night jobs. Johnny had no regular job. He worked at one-night places here and there. I want to tell you fellows, he said, that I got a couple of fine children home and a pretty wife, and I want to tell you that I'm not good enough for them. Take it easy, said a friend, and patted him on the shoulder. Francie overheard 2 men outside the group talking about her father. The short man said, I want you to hear this fellow talk about his wife and his kids. It's Rich. He's a funny duck. He brings his wages home to his wife but keeps his tips for booze. He's got a funny arrangement at McGarrity's. He turns all his tips over to him and McGarrity supplies him with drinks. He don't know whether McGarrity owes him money or whether he owes McGarrity. The system must work out pretty good for him, though. He's always carrying a load. The men walked away. There was a pain around Francie's heart, but when she saw how the men standing around her father liked him, how they smiled and laughed at what he said, and how eagerly they listened to him, the pain lessened. Those 2 men were exceptions. She knew that everyone loved her father. Yes, everyone loved Johnny Nolan. He was a sweet singer of sweet songs. Since the beginning of time, everyone, especially the Irish, had loved and cared for the singer in their midst. His brother waiters really loved him. The men he worked for loved him. His wife and children loved him. He was still gay and young and handsome. His wife had not turned bitter against him, and his children did not know that they were supposed to be ashamed of him. Oh, hey, Texas, welcome in. No, we're reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which I think I had mentioned before. It used to be my favorite book, and I haven't read it in like over a decade, and I'm now remembering what I like about it. It reminds me of my own family, and also, lately there's just so much talk about immigrants, right? And how much they're ruining this country and stuff. And this book is all about immigrants in the 1910s. So you can picture him so clearly. Yeah, me too, right? Me too, especially since my dad was similar to this man. But he had, I don't know, they don't talk about what color his hair is yet. So I'm not sure. Okay, ready? We're going to go move on. Francie pulled her thoughts away from that day when she had visited the Union headquarters. She listened to her father again. He was reminiscing. Take me, I'm nobody. Placidly, he lit up a nickel cigar. My folks came over from Ireland the year the potatoes gave out. Fellow ran a steamship company, said he'd take my father to America. Had a job waiting for him. Said he'd take the boat fare from his wages. So my father and mother came over. My father was like me, never held the one job long. He smoked in silence for a while. Francie ironed quietly. She knew that he was just thinking out loud. He did not expect her to understand. He just wanted someone to listen to him. He said practically the same things every Saturday. The rest of the week when he was drinking, he would come and go and say little. But today was Saturday. It was his day to talk. My folks never knew how to read or write. I only got to the 6th grade myself. Had to leave school when the old man died. You kids are lucky. I'm going to see to it that you get through school. Yes, Papa. I was a boy of 12 then. I sang in saloons for the drunks and they threw pennies at me. Then I started working around saloons and restaurants, waiting on people. He was quiet a while with his thoughts. I always wanted to be a real singer, the kind that comes out on the stage all dressed up. But I didn't have no education and I didn't know the first way about how to start being a stage singer. Mind your job, my mother told me. You don't know how lucky you are to have work, she said, so I drifted into the singing waiter business. It's not steady work. I'd be better off if I was just a plain waiter. That's why I drink, he finished up illogically. I'm just assuming his hair is black. My dad's hair was black, so that's kind of the picture I have in my mind, too. She looked up at him as though she were going to ask a question, but she said nothing. I drink because I don't stand a chance, and I know it. I couldn't drive a truck like other men, and I couldn't get on the cops with my build. I gotta sling beer and sing when I just want to sing. I drink because I got responsibilities that I can't handle. There was another long pause. Then he whispered, I am not a happy man. I got a wife and children, and I don't happen to be a hard-working man. I never wanted a family. Again, that hurt around Francie's heart. He didn't want her or Neely? What does a man like me want a family for? But I fell in love with Katie Romilly. Oh, I'm not blaming your mother, he said quickly. If it hadn't been her, it would have been Hildy O'Dare. You know, I think your mother is still jealous of her. But when I met Katie, I said to Hildy, you go your way and I'll go mine. So I married your mother. We had children. Your mother is a good woman, Francie. Don't you ever forget that. Francie knew that Mama was a good woman. She knew. And Papa said so. Then why did she like her father better than her mother? Why did she? Papa was no good. He said so himself. But she liked Papa better. Yes, your mother works hard. I love my wife and I love my children. Francie was happy again. But shouldn't a man have a better life? Maybe someday it will be that the unions will arrange for a man to work and to have time for himself too. But that won't be in my time. Now it's work hard all the time or be a bum. No in between. When I die, nobody will remember me for long. No one will say, he was a man who loved his family and believed in the union. All they will say is, too bad, but he was nothing but a drunk no matter which way you look at it. Yes, they'll say that. The room was very quiet. Johnny Nolan threw his half-smoked cigar out of the unscreened window with a bitter gesture. He had a premonition that he was running his life out too fast. He looked at the little girl ironing away so quietly with her head bent over the board, and he was stabbed by the soft sadness on the child's thin face. Listen, he went to her and put an arm around her thin shoulders. If I get a lot of tips tonight, I'll put the money on a good horse that I know is running Monday. I'll put a couple of dollars on him and win 10. Then I'll put the 10 on another horse I know and win 100. If I use my head and have any kind of luck at all, I'll run it up to 500. Pipe dreams, he thought to himself, even while he was telling her about his dream winnings. But oh, how wonderful, he thought, if everything you talked about could come true. He went on talking. Then do you know what I'm going to do, prima donna? Francie smiled happily, pleased at his using the nickname he had given her when, as a baby, he swore that her crying was as varied and as tuneful as an opera singer's range. No, what are you going to do? I'm going to take you on a trip. Just you and me, prima donna. We'll go way down south where the cotton blossoms blow. He was delighted with the sentence. He said it again. Down where the cotton blossoms blow. Then he remembered that the sentence was a line in a song that he knew. He jammed his hands in his pockets, whistled, and started to do a waltz clog like Pat Rooney. Then he went into the song. And I don't know this song, so I can't sing it. A field of snowy white. Hear the darkies singing soft and low. I long there to be, for someone waits for me, down where the cotton blossoms blow. Francie kissed his cheek softly. Oh, Papa, I love you so much, she whispered. He held her tight. Again, the stab wound feeling. Oh, God, he repeated to himself in almost unendurable agony. What a hell of a father I am. But when he spoke to her again, it was quietly enough. All of this isn't getting my apron ironed, though. It's all done, Papa. She folded it into a careful square. Is there any money in the house, baby? She looked into the cracked cup on the shelf. A nickel and some pennies. Would you take 7 cents and go out and get me a dickie and a paper collar? Francie went over to the dry goods store to get her father's Saturday night linen. A dickie was a shirt front made of stiffly starched muslin. It fastened round the neck with a collar button, and the vest held it in place. It was used instead of a shirt. It was worn once and then thrown away. A paper collar was not exactly made out of paper. It was called that to differentiate it from a celluloid collar, which was what poor men wore, because it could be laundered simply by being wiped with a wet rag. A paper collar was made out of thin cambric, stiffly starched. It could be used only once. When Francie got back, Papa had shaved, wetted his hair down, shined his shoes, and put on a clean undershirt. It was unironed and had a big hole in the back, but it smelled nice and clean. He stood on a chair and took down a little box from the top cupboard shelf. It contained the pearl studs that Katie had given him for a wedding present. They had cost her a month's salary. Johnny was very proud of them. No matter how hard up the Nolans were, the studs were never pawned. Francie helped him put the studs in the dickie. He fastened the wing collar on with a golden collar button, a present that Hildy O'Dare had given him before he became engaged to Katie. He wouldn't part with that either. His tie was a piece of heavy black silk, and he tied an expert bow with it. Other waiters wore ready-made bows attached to elastics, but not Johnny Nolan. Other waiters wore soiled white shirts or clean shirts indifferently ironed and celluloid collars, but not Johnny. His linen was immaculate, if temporary. He was dressed at last. His wavy blonde hair, it's blonde. His wavy blonde hair gleamed, and he smelled clean and fresh from washing and shaving. He put his coat on and buttoned it up jauntily. The satin lapels of the tuxedo were threadbare. But who would look at that when the suit fitted him so beautifully and the crease in his trousers was so perfect? Francie looked at his well-polished black shoes and noticed how the cuffless trousers came down in the back over the heel, and what a nice break they made across his instep. No other father's pants hung just that way. Francie was proud of her father. She wrapped up his ironed apron carefully in a piece of clean paper saved for that purpose. She walked him to the trolley car. Women smiled at him until they noticed the little girl clinging to his hand. Johnny looked like a handsome devil-may-care Irish boy instead of the husband of a scrub woman and the father of 2 children who were always hungry. They passed Gabriel's hardware store and stopped to look at the skates in the window. Mama never had time to do this. Papa talked as though he would buy Francie a pair someday. They walked to the corner. When a Graham Avenue trolley came along, he swung up onto the platform, suiting his rhythm to the car's slowing down. As the car started up again, he stood on the back platform holding onto the bar while he leaned way out to wave to Francie. No man had ever looked so gallant as her father, she thought. Or is it gallant? Anyway, good-looking dad. Oof, sir, that is too real to tell your children, right? I know. I know. See, my mom talked like that. My dad was, anyway, I'm seeing a lot of, as a kid, I picked this book up and I was just like, you know, how do they know my family? Dang. It's very Tomcat energy, very slinky. Actually, I know a young man locally that this really reminds me of too, and I have no idea what his nationality is, but very tall and lanky and charming as all get out. And he's in the swing dance community, and I was actually his first instructor. Um, anyway, very charming, and just all clothes look good on him. You know, it was that kind of thing. Okay. After she had seen Papa off, Francie went up to see what kind of costume Floss Gaddis had for the dance that night. This is that lady before that was yelling out the window trying to get a date. Oh yeah, I definitely know what you mean. Yeah, like the way that she's talking about the clothes hanging on him. Like my dad definitely had that, and this young man that I know also, you know, just clothes horse kind of a look, very trim. Also, you know, your posture has a lot to do with it. Anyway, I'm getting off track, but yeah. Flossie supported her mother and brother by working as a turner in a kid glove factory. The gloves were stitched on the wrong side, and it was her job to turn them right side out. Often she brought work home to do at night. They needed every cent they could get on account of her brother not being able to work. He had consumption, which we now know as tuberculosis, FYI. Francie had been told that Henry Gaddis was dying, but she didn't believe it. He didn't look it. In fact, he looked wonderful. He had clear skin with a beautiful pink color in his cheeks. His eyes were large and dark and burned steadily like a lamp protected from the wind. But he knew. He was 19 and avid for life, and he couldn't understand why he was doomed. Mrs. Gaddis was glad to see Francie. Company took Henny's thoughts off himself. Henny, here's Francie, she called out cheerfully. Hello, Francie. Hello, Henny. Don't you think Henny's looking good, Francie? Tell him that he's looking good. You're looking good, Henny. Henny addressed an unseen companion. She tells a dying man that he's looking good. I mean it. No, you don't. You're just saying that. How you talk, Henny. Look at me, how skinny I am. And I never think about dying. You won't die, Francie. You were born to lick this rotten life. Still in all, I wish I had nice red cheeks like you. No, you don't. Not if you knew where they come from. Henny, you should sit on the roof more, said his mother. She tells a dying man he should sit on the roof, reported Henny to his invisible companion. Fresh air is what you need, and sunshine. Leave me alone, Mama, for your own good. Mama, leave me alone. Leave me alone. Suddenly, he put his head down on his arms and pulled tormented, coughing sobs out of his body. Flossie and her mother looked at each other and silently agreed to let him alone. They left him coughing and sobbing in the kitchen and went into the front room to show Francie the costumes. Flossie did 3 things each week. She worked on the gloves, she worked on her costumes, and she worked on Frank. She went to a masquerade ball every Saturday night wearing a different costume each time. The costumes were especially designed to hide her disfigured right arm. As a child, she had fallen into a wash boiler of scalding hot water, carelessly left standing on the kitchen floor. Her right arm had been horribly burned, and she grew up with its skin withered and purple. She always wore long sleeves. Since it was essential that a masquerade costume be décolleté, she had devised a backless costume, the front cut to display her overfull bust, and with one long sleeve to cover that right arm. The judges thought that the one flowing sleeve symbolized something. Invariably, she won first prize. Flossie got into the costume she was going to wear that night. It resembled the popular conception of what a Klondike dance hall girl wore. It was made of a purple satin sheath with layers of cerise tarlatan underskirts. There was a black sequin butterfly stitched over the place where her left breast come to a blunt point. The one sleeve was made of pea green chiffon. Francie admired the costume. Flossie's mother threw open the closet door, and Francie looked at the row of brilliantly covered garments. I don't know about you, but those colors sound a little something to me, a little off. Let's see, purple satin sheath. That's the main part of the dress, right? Cerise is cherry, tarlatan underskirts, black sequin butterfly. Okay, and then pea green chiffon. Okay, maybe. Anyway, it's very colorful, very, very Mardi Gras. Flossie had 6 sheaths of various colors and the same number of tarlatan underskirts. I don't know what tarlatan is if somebody wants to look that up. And at least 20 chiffon sleeves of every color that a person could imagine. Each week, Flossie switched the combinations to make a new costume. Next week, the cerise underskirt might froth out from beneath a sky blue sheath with 1 black chiffon sleeve, and so on. There were 24 tightly rolled, never used silk umbrellas in that closet, prizes she had won. Flossie collected them for display the way an athlete collects cups. Francie felt happy looking at all the umbrellas. Poor people have a great passion for huge quantities of things. While Francie was admiring the costumes, she began to grow uneasy. While looking at the brilliant frothing colors, cerise, orange, bright blue, red, and yellow, she had a feeling that something was stealthily concealed behind those costumes. It was something wrapped in a long, somber cloak with a grinning skull and bones for hands, and it was hiding behind these brilliant colors, waiting for a henny. Oh, thank you. It's a stiff cotton fabric. Tarlatan's an open weave cotton fabric stiffened with starch. Oh, okay. Like I first read it as tartan, like plaid, right? And I was like, that doesn't sound good. But tarlatan. All right, we've got just a chapter that's only several pages, so let's do that before I make more tea. And I'm going to have a little bit of my crispy. So Tex, I know you weren't here at the beginning, right? So we have these green onion, bamboo shoot green onion crackers from Taiwan. Oh, hey, Dead Chrome, welcome in. How are you? I'll tell you too then. So this is what the bag looked like. Bamboo shoot biscuits, scallion bamboo shoot biscuits. They're from Taiwan. And they taste a bit like, oh, there's that. Thank you for doing that shout out. They taste a lot like the scallion pancake that you kind of get at the Chinese restaurant, including the greasiness on the outside, but they are hella tasty. So I'm having those, and also something else I bought yesterday and hadn't tried was these Skippy. They're peanut butter chocolate wafer little minis. And then I have these massive blueberries from Peru, which are kind of like, they have a tough skin on the outside, kind of like a grape. So they're very hard to the touch. Like I can hardly crush it. I've had this style once before that they probably ship really well. And we're reading Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is all about first and second generation immigrants in the 1910s in New York City. And we're having Gaba Oolong tea, which I'll make some fresh after this chapter. Chapter 5. Mama came home at 6. Oh, now we get to meet Mom. Gonna make some coffee. Perfect. There's coffee in this book. There's a lot of food and yeah, food. I think the only beverage so far has been coffee and beer, maybe. Mama came home at 6 with Aunt Sissy. Francie was very glad to see Sissy. She was her favorite aunt. Francie loved her and was fascinated by her. So far, Sissy had led a very exciting life. She was 35 now, had been married 3 times, and had given birth to 10 children, all of whom had died soon after being born. Sissy often said that Francie was all of her 10 children. Again, this is in the year like 1912 or so. Sissy worked in a rubber factory and was very wild as far as men were concerned. She had roving black eyes, black curling hair, and a high clear color. She liked to wear a cherry-colored bow in her hair. Mama was wearing her jade green hat, which made her skin look like cream off the top of the bottle. The roughness of her pretty hands was hidden by a pair of white cotton gloves. She and Sissy came in talking excitedly and laughing as they recalled to each other the jokes they had heard at the show. Sissy brought Francie a present, a corncob pipe that you blew into and a rubber hen popped up and swelled over the pipe bowl. The pipe came from Sissy's factory. The factory made a few rubber toys as a blind. It made its big profits from other rubber articles which were bought in whispers. Francie hoped that Sissy would stay for supper. When Sissy was around, everything was gay and glamorous. Francie felt that Sissy understood how it was with little girls. Other people treated children like lovable but necessary evils. Sissy treated them like important human beings. But although Mama urged her, Sissy wouldn't stay. She had to go home, she said, and see if her husband still loved her. This made Mama laugh. Francie laughed too, although she didn't understand what Sissy meant. Sissy left after promising that she would come back on the first of the month with the magazines. Sissy's current husband worked for a pulp magazine house. Each month, he received copies of all their publications: love stories, Wild West stories, detective stories, supernatural stories, and whatnot. They had shiny, colorful covers, and he received them from the stockroom, tied up in a length of new yellow twine. Sissy brought them over to Francie just as they came. Francie read them all avidly, then sold them at half price to the neighborhood stationery store and put the money in Mama's tin can bank. After Sissy left, Francie told Mama about the old man at Loescher's with the obscene feet. "Nonsense," said Mama. "Old age isn't such a tragedy. If he was the only old man in the world, yes, but he has other old men to keep him company. Old people are not unhappy. They don't long for the things we want. They just want to be warm and have soft food to eat and remember things with each other. Stop being so foolish. If there's one thing certain, it's that we all have to get old someday, so get used to the idea as quickly as you can." Oh my God, that really does sound like my mother. Francie knew that Mama was right. Still, she was glad when Mama spoke of something else. She and Mama planned what meals they'd make from the stale bread in the week to come. The Nolans practically lived on that stale bread, and what amazing things Katie could make from it. She'd take a loaf of stale bread, pour boiling water over it, work it up into a paste, flavor it with salt, pepper, thyme, minced onion, and an egg if eggs were cheap, and bake it in the oven. When it was good and brown, she made a sauce from half a cup of ketchup, 2 cups of boiling water, seasoning, a dash of strong coffee, thickened it with flour, and poured it over the baked stuff. It was good, hot, tasty, and staying. What was left over was sliced thin the next day and fried in hot bacon fat. Okay, wait, that sounds delicious. Best part of this book is happening right now. Right now, so pay attention. I don't know what you call that stuff, but it sounds really good, right? Mama made a very fine bread pudding from slices of stale bread, sugar, cinnamon, and a penny apple sliced thin. When this was baked brown, sugar was melted and poured over the top. Sometimes she made what she had named Wegschnittens, which laboriously translated meant something made with bread bits that would usually be thrown away. Bits of bread were dipped into a batter made from flour, water, salt, and an egg, and then fried in deep hot fat. While they were frying, Francie ran down to the candy store and bought a penny's worth of brown rock candy. This was crushed with a rolling pin and sprinkled on top of the fried bits just before eating. The crystals didn't quite melt, and that made it wonderful. Saturday supper was a red-letter meal. The Nolans had fried meat. A loaf of stale bread was made into pulp with hot water and mixed with a dime's worth of chopped meat into which an onion had been cleavered. Salt and a penny's worth of minced parsley were added for flavor. This was made up into little balls, fried and served with hot ketchup. These meatballs had a name, frikadellen, which was a great joke with Francie and Neely. They lived mostly on these things made from stale bread, and condensed milk and coffee, onions, potatoes, and always the penny's worth of something bought at the last minute added for Philip. Once in a while they had a banana, but Francie always longed for oranges and pineapple, and especially tangerines, which she got only for Christmas. Sometimes when she had a spare penny, she bought broken crackers. The grocery man would make a toot, which was a poke made of a bit of twisted paper, and fill it with bits of sweet crackers that had been broken in the box and could no longer be sold as whole crackers. Mama's rule was, don't buy candy or cake if you have a penny. Buy an apple. But what was an apple? Francie found that a raw potato tasted just as good, and this she could have for free. There were times, though, especially toward the end of a long, cold, dark winter, when, no matter how hungry Francie was, nothing tasted good. That was big pickle time. She'd take a penny and go down to a store on Moore Street that had nothing in it but fat Jew pickles floating around in a heavy spice brine. A patriarch with a long white beard, black skull cap, and toothless gums presided over the vats with a big forked wooden stick. Francie ordered the same as the other kids did. So that's this picture right here. Cereal, chopped onions this evening, truly a hero. Yeah, so here's the picture of the pickle man. So she ordered, give me a penny sheeny pickle. The Hebrew looked at the Irish child with his fierce red-rimmed eyes, small, tortured, and fiery. Goyim, goyim, he spat at her, hating the word sheeny. Francie meant no harm. She didn't know what the word meant, really. It was a term applied to something alien yet beloved. The Jew, of course, did not know this. Francie had been told that he had one vat from which he sold only to Gentiles. Gentiles. It was said that he spat or did worse in this vat once a day. That was his revenge. But this was never proven against the poor old Jew, and Francie, for one, did not believe it. As he stirred with his stick, muttering curses into his strained white beard, he was thrown into a hysterical passion by Francie asking for a pickle from the bottom of the vat. This brought on eye rollings and clutchings of the beard. Eventually, a fine fat pickle, greenish yellow and hard at the ends, was fished out and laid on a scrap of brown paper. Still cursing, the Jew received her penny in his vinegar-scarred palm and retired to the rear of his store where his temper cooled as he sat nodding in his beard, dreaming of old days in the old country. The pickle lasted all day. Francie sucked and nibbled on it. She didn't exactly eat it. She just had it. When they had bread and potatoes too many times at home, Francie's thoughts went to dripping sour pickles. She didn't know why, but after a day of the pickle, the bread and potatoes tasted good again. Yes, pickle day was something to look forward to. What do you guys think about pickles? That's really interesting, isn't it? I'm going to go ahead and pour off this cold tea and make some new hot tea. I used to really love pickles like that when I lived on the East Coast. Just judging from like a nutritional standpoint of point of view, I bet that she was like needing the whatever, the vitamins, because it doesn't sound like they really got fresh vegetables at all other than onions and potatoes. I'm gonna go ahead and make some more. You're obsessed with pickles? Yeah, I really like all kinds of pickles, and I did grow up with having them in the house all the time. And on the East Coast, you can get really good dill pickles and Jewish pickles and New York style, all of that stuff. I also like bread and butter pickles, which is more of a southern thing, because my mom was actually somewhat, my grandparents were southern, and so they're the sweet pickles. And so I do like those as well. But I know the sour pickle that they're talking about in this story. I've never bought one out of a vat like that, but that actually sounds pretty good. Like they were probably really legit pickles. For a penny, though, can you imagine? Okay, this is going to take a minute because I've lost track of like what infusion we're on, but it's probably like 5 or 6 of this tea. So, it's going to take a little while. This is a very tightly rolled tea. We'll take a look at the leaves after I get it emptied out again. But it's from Taiwan Tea Crafts, and it's a very deep roasted organic GABA oolong tea, which is very calming. And, frankly, pretty good for you, but also just tastes really good and just comforting, and just very, very neutral roasty tea flavor. Goes with all foods. And I have had a bunch of weird foods today. So I had like a garlic and spinach pizza with Alfredo sauce, and now I'm having blueberries, scallion crackers, and peanut butter chocolate candy treat things. Yeah. Fried pickled chips are my absolute favorite. I don't think I've ever had that. Do you mean like chips that are flavored like pickles, or do you mean like pickle slices that they batter and fry like deep fried pickles? I've never had that. I'm just going to keep eating these massive blueberries here while we're waiting for the tea. Anyway, I hope you're liking the book so far. It's got some things in it that are very difficult themes, but probably pretty darn realistic as to what things were like at that time in the tenements in New York City. You like fried pickle slices, but you do not care for fried pickle spears. Those are foul. Okay, that's very specific. I've never had any of those fried. Interesting. Is there too much pickle in them? Probably the spears. I'm trying to imagine like what's the difference, but okay, gonna go ahead and pour this. I'm using this because the teapot's, the lid of the teapot is pretty hot. And I can't really find a good place to hold on to it. So my little tool makes it so that the lid doesn't come flying off and break somewhere, like on my tray. But I can also just pour all of the tea out, which is what you want to do with gong fu tea. Is you definitely want to get all the tea out after each steep. So let's take a look at how the leaves are doing. It's tough though because the leaves are very dark. I think I could have put more tea leaves in this pot. Oh, see how they're still curled up? That's one thing with really roasted tea, with deep roasted tea, is I'm going to fluff them a little bit and turn them over, which actually kind of helps with the steeping. With really deep roasted tea, oh, this is a good shot. There's something about the deep roasting that like really dries the leaves out, and they stay rolled for longer or curled, for longer. So these don't have they're still hard. They're not even fully saturated. So you get a lot of steepings out of them. A lot of infusions because they just it takes them forever to saturate. Meanwhile, you're having all this delicious tea. So there's something to be said for the sort of economy of getting a really roasted tea because you can just use it. You can just really get a lot of tea out of it. The spears have way too much pickle meat, for lack of a better word, and they're very wet. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So there's just too much pickle per batter, or yeah, I guess whatever. Are they breaded or are they like with crumbs, or I would think they'd have to be sealed in batter. But anyway, coating, let's just say. Too much pickle per coating. All right, we're gonna have another one of these super crispy. Focus, please. There we go. Crispy crackers. And here's our beautiful tea. Trying to get up there past the reflection. Yeah, it's no good, and they're usually battered like fish. Okay, that's kind of what I imagine, but you grew up in the Midwest, you have a lot of opinions on street fair food. What about like the county? Do you ever go to the county fair? I can't say that. I think I did one time in Colorado when we lived there. I don't really remember that much about it, but I know it's a really popular thing. Funnel cakes are S tier. I definitely went to some, carnival or something that had. I have had funnel cakes before. Also fry bread, right? So Texas made fry bread yesterday. with a Native American theme, Native American food type food. And they made fry bread with and chili, and I can't remember what the name of that berry sauce was, but basically berry sauce, right? And since Texas wasn't here, I think the last time I ate one of these, I'm gonna wajapi. Yeah, that's not something I would remember. That's where I grew up in the country. County next to us had the largest county fair in the country. Wow. Fry bread with mutton stew was the best meal I had in the Southwest. Wow. Berry compote. Yeah, yeah. Not jam, like not attempting to like solidify it in any way, right? Or thicken it that way. I struggle getting these little packages open. These are very well sealed. I should have brought like little scissors over. Hang on. I'm going to use my teeth. Really, for some reason, hard to get a hold of. So I want to show one of these one more time before everything melts. Oh, some of the peanuts are falling off too. But I'll retrieve those out of the wrapper. So this is the Skippy Peanut Butter Minis. I've already decided that I like Reese's peanut butter treats better. So there were peanuts stuck to the top that have fallen off, as you can see. And then it's on top of a wafer-like thing. So a little crispy. And then inside is basically just a peanut butter dome. Literally just Skippy peanut butter. So pretty good. But now I have to finish it and clean my fingers before I start reading again because it is melting in my fingers a little bit. Yeah, just mash the berries, cook, add a slurry. Cook. Oh, it does have a slurry. Oh, okay. So it is thickened with, I missed that part. That's pretty good. I like peanut butter. My preference is really for a chunky. I was like, what's the other word from smooth? For a chunky or at least sort of coarse, natural style peanut butter and a little bit of extra salt, I think is my preference. And to me, like the Reese's peanut butter cup tastes and feels more like that. But since I bought this bag of these, I will eat them over time. So Texas likes the Reese's cups with crunchy bits. I haven't had one for so many years. I couldn't even remember. There's my hand. So when I went to the drugstore a couple weekends ago to get my vaccinations done, on the way out of the store, I forget what else we bought. We had to buy a couple things at the drugstore, so we were kind of there already. And they gave us a coupon. They bribed me with a $5 coupon for getting a vaccine. Actually, I got 2 coupons. So, at somewhere between there and the front counter, I saw the Reese's Big Cup, it's called. And it's just basically like a deeper peanut butter cup with more peanut butter in it. So I ate those while I was playing Baldur's Gate on the thing, and on stream, and I really liked them. It was like more peanut butter, less chocolate, proportion, and it was a little bit salty. I really did like that. I love Take Fives. It's like a Reese's with caramel and pretzels. Oh, I would like that because the crunchier the better for me. I would really like the crunchy of that and the salty. The wedding. It was I kind of talked about it at the beginning of stream, but it was fine. It was 5 minutes. It was very short, 5-10 minutes. We went and had it done by a judge, and you have to make an appointment and everything. It was just an interesting day, but we did get it done. We celebrated by buying a couple of pizzas on the way home from Costco. Such a romantic day. We tried to get passport photos done, since that was kind of one of the driving, reason for this. And I had a white shirt on, so I wasn't able to get them done yesterday. But we'll just do it, soon, next weekend or something like that. I didn't know that was a problem. But you cannot wear a white shirt. So everybody take note if you're going to get a passport photo. At least that's what the people told me. At the FedEx office. It was at FedEx office location. Otherwise, we could have had them right away. Like within 5 minutes, they could have given us. Look at this. I poured out all my tea already. I guess I'll make more while we're chatting. Do you? Yes. And do you? Yes. You're done. Go home. Yeah, it kind of was like that. I mean, I appreciate the judge, did make us actually say vows. She made us read, she made us repeat the vows after her. And I did have a little moment of panic when she said that, okay, now we're going to have you say your vows to each other. Cause I blurted out, were we supposed to bring some? I didn't write anything. I really thought it was going to be like what Texas just said, where we just said, yes, I will. We said, I will. She had to say, I will instead of I do. And we don't wear rings, so we didn't bring any rings. Although I'm wearing his ring today that I had made for him decades ago. I showed this off earlier. I don't know if you can read it, but it says Loki. And he just really doesn't wear rings. So you'll see this on my hand a lot for stream because it's very comfortable to wear. Looks like something, but most people can't read what it says. Sometimes I wear it to work because it doesn't get in the way when you type or anything. Had it made for him at a Ren fair or something like that, and he just doesn't wear rings. So, yeah, it was kind of funny. I talked earlier about the fact that they only accepted cash. And there was a weird energy to both getting the license, which we did earlier in the week, and then actually having the ceremony done. Both times was cash only. And this is official government business. So it was so weird to be like $5 cash only for the license, and then $125 cash only for the ceremony. And the lady just literally opened up a drawer and put the money in the drawer. It was just like, we kind of had a laugh on the way out. We walked out with no paperwork whatsoever because she has to go file that. And then the city or county or whatever it is will send us. They should have emailed him no, they probably won't email him until middle of next week. So right now, we're just hoping that it is official. But we don't have anything. So we were kind of like, walked out and we were kind of laughing like, did we just get scammed in a big way? Because we gave her $125 cash and we walked out with nothing at all. No receipt. I would have liked a receipt for the cash. We should have asked for that. So it was weird. But it was weird but fun, I guess. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pour out this tea here. I mean, I'm grateful. I'm really grateful to have this relationship in my life. And it's really been, it's been very comforting the last few weeks when things have been, you kind of feel like the country and the world has gone to crap. And you're just like, oh, at least we have each other. Yeah. So, but we are moving hard on getting passports and that sort of thing. All right, shall we move on? I'm all fortified with more tea. I'm not sure how much more people are able or willing to stick around to do. Blueberry, what time is it for you? Are you in Texas in the same time zone? Let me know. If you're comfortable, let me know what time it is where you are. Because I don't want to keep people up too late. I mean, of course, you can always come back and, you know. We're just about to talk about how they bought meat, which is also actually really interesting if you like that sort of thing. It's 10 p.m. Okay, it's fine. I'm thinking 40 minutes more, maybe. I'm just looking at my clock, you know. These reading streams tend to go longer. Okay, so chapter 6. Neely came home. That's Francie's brother. Neely came home, and he and Francie were sent out for the weekend meet. This was an important ritual and called for detailed instructions by Mama. Get a 5-cent soup bone off of Hassler's, but don't get the chopped meat there. Go to Werner's for that. Get round steak chopped, 10 cents worth, and don't let him give it to you off the plate. Take an onion with you, too. Francie and her brother stood at the counter a long time before the butcher noticed them. What's yours? He asked finally. Francie started the negotiations. 10 cents worth of round steak. Ground? No. Lady was just in. Bought a quarter's worth of round steak ground, only I ground too much, and here's the rest on the plate. Just 10 cents worth. Honestly, I only just ground it. That was the pitfall Francie had been told to watch against. Don't buy it off the plate no matter what the butcher says. No, my mother said 10 cents worth of round steak. Furiously, the butcher hacked off a bit of meat and slammed it down on the paper after weighing it. He was just about to wrap it up when Francie said in a trembling voice, "Oh, I forgot. My mother wants it ground." God damn it to hell. He hacked up the meat and shoved it into the chopper. Tricked again, he thought bitterly. The meat came out in fresh red spirals. He gathered it up in his hand and was just about to slam it down on the paper when... And Mother said to chop up an onion in it. Oh, Mama said. Timidly, she pushed the peeled onion that she had brought from home across the counter. Neely stood by and said nothing. His function was to come along for moral support. Jesus, the butcher said explosively, but he went to work with 2 cleavers chopping the onion up into the meat. Francie watched, loving the drumbeat rhythm of the cleavers. Again, the butcher gathered up the meat, slammed it down on the paper, and glared at Francie. She gulped. The last order would be the hardest of them all. The butcher had an idea of what was coming. He stood there, trembling inwardly. Francie said all in one breath, "And a piece of suet to fry it with." "Son of a bitchin' bastard," whispered the butcher bitterly. He slashed off a piece of white fat, let it fall to the floor in revenge, picked it up, and slammed it onto the mound of meat. He wrapped it furiously, snatched the dime, and as he turned it over to the boss for ringing up, he cursed the destiny that had made him a butcher. After the chopped meat deal, they went to Hassler's for the soup bone. Hassler was a fine butcher for bones, but a bad butcher for chopped meat because he ground it behind closed doors and God knows what you got. Neely waited outside with the package because if Hassler noticed you had bought meat elsewhere, he'd proudly tell you to go get your bone where you got your other meat. Francie ordered a nice bone with some meat on it for Sunday soup for 5 cents. Hassler made her wait outside while he told the stale joke. While he told her the stale joke, how a man had bought 2 cents worth of dog meat and how Hassler had asked, should he wrap it up for you or do you want to eat it here? Francie smiled shyly. The pleased butcher went into the icebox and returned, holding up a gleaming white bone with creamy marrow in it and shreds of red meat clinging to the ends. He made Francie admire it. After your mama cooks this, he said, tell her to take the marrow out, spread it on a piece of bread with pepper salt, and make a nice sandwich for you. I'll tell Mama. You eat it and get some meat on your bones, ha. After the bone was wrapped up and paid for, he sliced off a thick piece of liverwurst and gave it to her. Francie was sorry that she had deceived that kind man by buying the other meat elsewhere. Too bad Mama didn't trust him about chopped meat. It was still early in the evening and the streetlights had not yet come on, but already the horseradish lady was sitting in front of Hassler's grinding away at her pungent roots. Francie held out the cup that she had brought from home. The old mother filled it halfway up for 2 cents. Happy that the meat business was over, Francie bought 2 cents worth of soup greens from the greengrocers. Oh, they do eat greens. She got an emasculated carrot, a droopy leaf of celery, a soft tomato, and a fresh sprig of parsley. These would be boiled with the bone to make a rich soup with shreds of meat floating in it. Fat homemade noodles would be added. This, with the seasoned marrow spread on bread, would make a good Sunday dinner. After a supper of fried fricadelle, potatoes, smashed pie, and coffee, Neely went down to the street to play with his friends. Although there was no signal nor agreement, the boys always gathered on the corner after supper where they stood the whole evening, hands in pockets, shoulders hunched forward, arguing, laughing, pushing each other around, and jigging in time to whistled tunes. Maudie Donovan came around to go to confession with Francie. Maudie was an orphan who lived with two maiden aunts who worked at home. They made ladies' shrouds for a living, at so much per dozen for a casket company. They made satin tufted shrouds, white ones for dead virgins, pale lavender for the young married, purple for the middle-aged, and black for the old. Maudie brought some pieces. She thought Francie might like to make something out of them. Francie pretended to be glad, but shuddered as she put the gleaming scraps away. The church was smoky with incense and guttering candles. The nuns had put fresh flowers on the altars. The Blessed Mother's altar had the nicest flowers. She was more popular with the sisters than either Jesus or Joseph. People were lined up outside the confessionals. The girls and fellows wanted to get it over with before they went out on their dates. The line was longest at Father O'Flynn's cubicle. He was young, kind, tolerant, and easy on the penances. Isn't it interesting how this is like a whole cultural thing? When her turn came, Francie pushed aside the heavy curtain and knelt in the confessional. The old mystery took hold as the priest slid open the tiny door that separated him from the sinner and made the sign of the cross before the grilled window. He started whispering rapidly and monotonously in Latin with his eyes closed. She caught the mingled odors of incense, candle wax, flowers, and the good black cloth and shaving lotion of the priest. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Quickly were her sins confessed and quickly absolved. She came out with her head bowed over her clasped hands. She genuflected before the altar, then knelt at the rail. She said her penance, using her mother of pearl rosary to keep count of the prayers. Maudie, who lived a less complicated life, had had fewer sins to confess and had gotten out sooner. So she was sitting outside on the steps waiting when Francie came out. They walked up and down the block, arms about each other's waist, the way girlfriends did in Brooklyn. Maudie had a penny. She bought an ice cream sandwich and treated Francie to a bite. Soon Maudie had to go in. She wasn't allowed out on the street after 8 at night. The girls parted after mutual promises were asked and given to go to confession together the following Saturday. Don't forget, called Maudie, walking backwards away from Francie. I called for you this time, and it's your turn to call for me next time. I won't forget, promised Francie. There was company in the front room when Francie got home. Aunt Evie was there with her husband, Willie Flipman. Francie liked Aunt Evie. She looked a lot like Mama. She was full of fun and said things to make you laugh like people did in a show, and she could mimic anybody in the world. Uncle Flipman had brought his guitar along. He was playing it, and all were singing. Flipman was a thin, dark man with smooth black hair and a silky mustache. He played the guitar pretty well, considering that the middle finger of his right hand wasn't there. When he came to where he was supposed to use that finger, he'd give the guitar a thumping whack to do for the time when the note should be played. This gave a queer rhythm to his songs. He had nearly reached the end of his repertoire when Francie came in. She was just in time to hear his last selection. After the music, he went out and got a pitcher of beer. Aunt Evie treated to a loaf of pumpernickel bread and a dime's worth of Limburger cheese, and they had sandwiches and beer. Uncle Flipman got confidential after the beer. So these are German people. Look on me, Kate, he said to Mama, and you look on a man that's a failure. Aunt Evie rolled her eyes up and sighed, pulling in her lower lip. My children don't respect me, he said. My wife has no use for me, and Drummer, my milk wagon horse, is got it in for me. Do you know what he did to me just the other day? He leaned forward, and Francie saw his eyes brighten with unshed tears. I was washing him in the stable, and I was washing under his belly, and he went and wet on me. Kate and Evie looked at each other. Their eyes were dancing with hidden laughter. Katie looked suddenly at Francie. The laughter was still in her eyes, but her mouth was stern. Francie looked down on the floor and frowned, although she was laughing inside. That's what he did, and all the men in the stable laughed at me. Everyone laughs at me. He drank another glass of beer. Don't talk like that, Will, said his wife. Evie doesn't love me, he said to Mama. I love you, Will, Evie assured him in her soft, tender voice that was a caress in itself. You loved me when you married me, but you don't love me now, do you? He waited. Evie said nothing. You see, she don't love me anymore, he said to Mama. It's time we went home, said Evie. Got confidential is a great phrase, yeah. Both of my parents drank kind of a lot, so I can so relate to this mood. And then you're the child in the room, right? Before they went to bed, Francie and Neely had to read a page of the Bible and a page from Shakespeare. That was a rule. Mama used to read the 2 pages to them each night until they were old enough to read for themselves. To save time, Neely read the Bible page and Francie read from Shakespeare. They had been at this reading for 6 years and were halfway through the Bible and up to Macbeth and Shakespeare's complete works. They raced through the reading, and by 11, all the Nolans, excepting Johnny, who was working, were in bed. Just a second. Okay. On Saturday nights, Francie was allowed to sleep in the front room. She made a bed by pushing 2 chairs together in front of the window, where she could watch the people on the street. Lying there, she was aware of the nighttime noises in the house. People came in and went to their flats. Some were tired and dragged their feet. Others ran up the stairs lightly. One stumbled, cursing the torn linoleum in the hall. A baby cried half-heartedly, and a drunken man in one of the downstairs flats synopsized the wicked life he claimed his wife had led. At 2 a.m, Francie heard Papa singing softly as he came up the stairs. Sweet Molly Malone, she drove her wheelbarrow through streets wide and narrow, crying. Mama had the door open on crying. It was a game Papa had. If they got the door open before he finished the verse, they won. If he was able to finish it out in the hall, he won. Francie and Neely got out of bed and they all sat around the table and ate after Papa had put $3 down on the table and given the children each a nickel, which Mama made them put in the tin can bank, explaining they had already received money that day from the junk. Papa had brought home a paper bag full of food not used at the wedding because some of the guests hadn't come. The bride had divided the unconsumed food among the waiters. There was half of a cold-broiled lobster, 5 stone-cold fried oysters, an inch jar of caviar, and a wedge of Roquefort cheese. The children didn't like the lobster, and the cold oysters had no taste, and the caviar seemed too salty, but they were so hungry that they ate everything on the table and digested it, too, during the night. They could have digested nails had they been able to chew them. After she had eaten, Francie at last faced the fact that she had broken the fast, which started at midnight and was to have lasted until after Mass next morning. Now she could not receive communion. Here was a real sin to confess to the priest next week. Neely went back to bed and resumed his sound sleep. Francie went to the dark front room and sat by the window. She didn't feel like sleeping. Mama and Papa sat in the kitchen. They would sit there and talk until daybreak. Papa was telling about the night's work, the people he had seen, what they had looked like, and how they spoke. The Nolans just couldn't get enough of life. They lived their own lives up to the hilt, but that wasn't enough. They had to fill in on the lives of all the people they made contact with. So Johnny and Katie talked away the night, and the rise and fall of their voices was a safe and soothing sound in the dark. Now it was 3 a.m, and the street was very quiet. Francie saw a girl who lived in a flat across the street come home from a dance with her feller. They stood pressed close together in her vestibule. They stood embracing without talking until the girl leaned back and unknowingly pressed the bells. Then her father came down in his long underdrawers and with quiet but intense profanity told the fellow what he could go and do to himself. The girl ran upstairs giggling hysterically while the boyfriend walked away down the street whistling, "When I Get You Alone Tonight." Mr. Tomini, who owned the pawn shop, came home in a hansom cab from his spendthrift evening in New York. He had never set foot inside his pawn shop, which he had inherited along with an efficient manager. No one knew why Mr. Tomini lived in the rooms above the shop. A man with his money. He lived the life of an aristocratic New Yorker in the squalor of Williamsburg. A plasterer who had been in his rooms reported them furnished with statues, oil paintings, and white fur rugs. Mr. Tomini was a bachelor. No one saw him all week. No one saw him leave Saturday evenings. Only Francie and the cop on the beat saw him come home. Francie watched him feeling like a spectator in a theater box. His high silk hat was tipped over an ear. The streetlight picked up the gleam of his silver-knobbed cane as he tucked it under his arm. He swung back his white, satin-lined Inverness cape to get some money. The driver took the bill, touched the butt of his whip to the rim of his plug hat, and shook the horse's reins. Mr. Tomini watched him drive away as though the cab were the last link in a life that he had found good. Then he went upstairs to his fabulous apartment. Oh, hey, Serial. Wow, I just took a much longer nap than I intended to, haha, but my headache is all gone. Oh, that's so nice. When you started reading, it was just so soothing. Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that you feel better. And sometimes sleep can do that. So this scene is actually the parents. So Johnny came home from his waiter job and he's wearing his silk tie, his disposable Dickie and collar, and his holy undershirt that he wore under his tux. And then there's his wife. And they're having coffee and talking all night. So we're talking about Mr. Tomini, the rich neighbor who owns the pawn shop. He was supposed to frequent such legendary places as Reisenweber's and the Waldorf. Francie decided to see these places someday. Someday she would go across Williamsburg Bridge, which was only a few blocks away, and find her way uptown in New York to where these fine places were and take a good look at the outside. Then she'd be able to place Mr. Tomini more accurately. A fresh breeze blew in over Brooklyn from the sea. From far away on the north side, where the Italians lived and kept chickens in their yards, came the crowing of a rooster. It was answered by the distant barking of a dog and an inquiring whinny from the horse Bob comfortably bedded in his stable. Francie was glad for Saturday and hated to end it by going to sleep. Already the dread of the week to come made her uneasy. She fixed the memory of this Saturday in her mind. It was without fault, except for the old man waiting for bread. Other nights in the week, she would have to lie on her cot, and from the air shaft hear the indistinct voices of the childlike bride who lived in one of the other flats with her ape-like truck driver husband. The bride's voice would be soft and pleading, his rough and demanding. Then there would be a short silence. Then he would start snoring, and the wife would cry piteously until early morning. Recalling the sobs, Francie trembled, and instinctively her hands flew to cover her ears. Then she remembered it was Saturday. Wow, I think it just started raining really hard. Listening. Not a funny situation, that's my bad. That's okay, it's a funny description. Okay, it started raining hard, but I think we're okay with the skylight sort of above me here. Just checking to make sure it wasn't raining in. And the rain shower is probably ending already. Okay. This is another sort of interesting part of the story. Recalling the sobs, Francie trembled and instinctively her hands flew to cover her ears. Then she remembered it was Saturday. She was in the front room where she couldn't hear sounds from the air shaft. Yes, it was still Saturday, and it was wonderful. Monday was a long time away. Peaceful Sunday would come in between, when she could think long thoughts about the nasturtiums in the brown bowl and the way the horse had looked being washed while standing in sunshine and shadow. She was growing drowsy. She listened a moment to Katie and Johnny talking in the kitchen. They were reminiscing. I was 17 when I first met you, Katie was saying, and I was working in the Castle Braid factory. I was 19 then, recalled Johnny, and keeping company with your best friend, Hildy O'Dare. Oh, her, sniffed Katie. So this is them doing their reminiscing. The sweet smelling warm wind moved gently in Francie's hair. She folded her arms on the windowsill and laid her cheek on them. She could look up and see the stars high above the tenement roofs. After a while, she went to sleep. Okay, so that's the end of the first book. So that's actually probably a good stopping point for now.